Hot Squall Tanoyap, Monica Queen Sna. Hello, my name is Monica. We're from Norgate Community School.
Hot Squall Tanoyap, Norman Queen Sna. Tina Chitla Homolchiston Squalauto.
Chopwood Taquayan, Ta, Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. Online at www.coopradio.org.
PFLAG Canada is there when it seems no one else is. Are you struggling with an LGBT issue? Maybe you're a parent, a family member, employer, a coworker, an educator, a healthcare provider. PFLAG is Canada's only national organization that helps all Canadians who are struggling with issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. PFLAG Canada supports, educates, and provides resources 24/7. Visit pflagcanada.ca.
Welcome to the Conversation Lab. In 2017, BC Timber Sales informed Bowen Council of their intention to log the Crown lands on Mount Gardner. Our provincial government manages about 20% of the province's timber. If you look on their website, they promote generating economic prosperity for British Columbians through the safe, sustainable development and auctions of public timber. BC Timber Sales wanted to log 1,400 hectares. That's about 3,500 acres, or almost a third of Bowen Island. This is the thread, maybe it's a trail, that weaves through the island, tying this podcast and our community together. I wanted to better understand what Mount Gardner, Crippen Park, and Cape Roger Curtis have in common, so I reached out to David Hocking, who's been on this path a lot longer than me. David Hocking is a graduate from the University of Calgary. He's the former communication director of the David Suzuki Foundation, and he served as a municipal councillor on Bowen for a couple of terms. I always worry that I missed something in those introductions. Could you do it again for us and tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm David Hocking. I've had a long career in all kinds of different things. Started out as a teacher. I've worked for the CBC. Kind of the crux of it was working for the Suzuki Foundation for a decade. I was a communications director, but I was the acting executive director when RED was ill. Back when I started there in 96. Yeah, 96. There was kind of a sense that the environmentalism, the movement started in the 70s and so on, it's kind of got some success. But when you actually dig into the details and work with scientists, you realize how off track we were and how much needed to be done. And climate change became the area that I really focused. I got to know the science, met with a whole lot of scientists, spent some time with people like, Andrew Weaver and so on. And it really changed the way I look at things because it was such an array of forces. I was at a conference once, national conference, and the Canadian Environment Minister was talking, the Minister of the Environment for Canada. His name was Sergio Marchi. And I went up to him afterwards to say, you're not doing enough. And it's just terrible. And he shot back that I know I'm not. But the problem is it's not just me who has to act. It's every cabinet minister. Climate change cannot be dealt with by the environment minister. It's everybody who needs to act. And that was a really important lesson because to address climate change, you're looking at changing the way we do almost everything. And that's really tough. And so years of communications around climate change, what we did at the Suzuki Foundation, what I've done personally is you talk to people about what this means. And it's around species extinction. It's around forest fires. It's around floods. It's all these heat waves and new diseases and all these things. In other words, it's all about bad things coming towards us and we need to act to stop it. Most people will agree with you. Yeah, we need to stop it. It's pretty hard for Mr. and Mrs. Smith to figure out what they should be doing because it's such a big issue and it involves so much. And so that's kind of the tricky part where I'm trying to spend some time now is to figure out, okay, I'm kind of a policy person. I want to drive public policy that helps people do the right thing, that helps businesses do the right thing, and convinces businesses that they should do the right thing because the wrong thing starts to become too expensive and difficult. And so that's kind of where I focus in my efforts right now.
When did you come to Bowen?
When did I come or why?
No, when did you come? Well, when did you come to Bowen and why?
So I was living in Calgary, but I kind of spending a lot of time in the mountains and had spent some time in the mountains and the coast out here. on vacations. And I wanted to move to the West Coast somewhere. And I, love the West Coast, the mountains and the ocean, everything together. So my sister moved from Toronto to this little island off Horseshoe Bay. So I came to visit. She took me out a trip to across the island to Cape Roger Curtis, and loved the place. Kids loved the place. And it was, I realized, we don't need to move to Fino or the Gulf Islands. Can move to Bowen Island, where you can, work in Vancouver if you need to. But that's why, to be able to live on the West Coast, but to be able to be close enough to go, look for a job in Vancouver. And I did. And I ended up then, after I moved here, getting a job with the David Suzuki Foundation in the summer of '96.
Thanks for sharing that, David. I'm always fascinated to find out how people came to Bowen. Can you shed some light on Cape Roger Curtis and how we got here?
Sure. Yeah, a little bit. Back then, when I first came here, it was owned by a family, the Burke family, and we all basically used it as a park. We felt it was ours. We could just use it as a park. We, used it carefully. We didn't wreck it or anything like that, but we'd go through the trails, and sometimes the kids would get lost. We'd have to send search parties out because there were old logging trails all over the place. But then we heard, after I moved here, we heard that the Burke family was interested in selling it. And so a bunch of us, various groups, got together to see what we could do about it, coming up with various ideas. But then when it did get sold, it looked like there was going to be some proposals for development. A bunch of us decided to run for council. And I agreed to run. And the basic idea behind my running was to somehow protect Cape Roger Curtis as a park in some way or another.
So that's 2005?
Yeah, that was 2005. Yeah. So what we did, the mayor and I worked on this a lot, and we worked with other folks in the community. And we developed various strategies to try to, because the proposal, it's zoned for 58 10-acre lots or 224 single-family homes spread across the whole place. So we didn't like either of those options. And so we pushed for a kind of a sustainability type of approach. And one of the developers at that time had been doing rezonings where he ended up protecting half the land, put the homes over on one side and left half of the land as a park. So that's what we suggested. And also, I was familiar, I just visited Hawaii around that time, and I saw that along there where you have some of the most valuable homes anywhere, they've got a walkway right along the coast. So anyone can walk along the coast right in front of incredibly expensive homes, townhomes and whatnot. So we said, okay, we want you to protect half of the land as a park and as much of the waterfront as possible for public trails. And so, the owners obviously pushed back, but we pushed back as well. And in the end, they came up with a plan which did that. The problem was, it was, instead of the official community plan of 224 units, it was 390, which is obviously way over the OCP. And so then it became kind of a debate in the public. And unfortunately, it ended up becoming either drown this plan, I think were some of the words, or try to work with the plan, see if we can get somewhere with it, negotiate, change things a little bit. For instance, the plan did say you could sell some section of it for a conservation buyer. That would have reduced the number by, a dozen or 20 homes maybe. But it became polarized. And I think a little bit of the history of that polarization is the history of Crippen Park. So, and this was before I came here, but, I got told by lots of friends, is that, a developer proposed to started logging the area of Crippen Park right around where the school is now. That's where you see a bunch of alders. And it was going to be a housing development. And so some of my people who became my friends stood in front of the bulldozers and said, no, you're not going to do this. And in the end, they turned it back. And I don't know what the negotiation was with Metro Vancouver, how they got involved, but it became a Metro Vancouver park. So I think that history of let's just stop this stuff was part of it. And so it became polarized in that way, which is really unfortunate. And it really divided the community. And, I was right in the middle of that. I decided not to run for council after that.
So do you think much has changed?
I think the island has changed quite a bit since then. It's grown a fair bit and it's turned over quite a heck of a lot. So I think it has changed to some degree, but that approach of, let's get out there and just say no, is certainly still there. But, it's kind of everywhere. One of the jobs that I had in the last while was I worked for Metro Vancouver on communications and engagement. And so I was the guy in the front of the room on public consultations on a lot of things, giving presentations on the regional growth strategy or the solid waste plan or whatever. And you realize that the just say no is a reaction that happens kind of everywhere. And when you're trying to have an engagement process where you really talk to people through, small table groups and things like that, that's great. But because if you end up with big meetings, usually there's some people who want to grab the mic and just say no and make big speeches. And so it's not just Bowen Island. It's kind of one way that people respond to change is it makes them uncomfortable.
There's no question we live in the most polarized time in history. There's certainly enough research to back that up. I wonder if you could tie together Crippen, Mount Gardner, and Cape Roger Curtis and the dots that connect all three.
Back about 6 years ago, in this late spring, I think it was, of 2017, we had a big surprise on the island because suddenly the Ministry of Forest wanted to have a public meeting to talk about logging on Bowen. And so a group of us formed a group to, all right, we have to stop this. There I am talking about stopping things. And I volunteered to be on I guess we called it the steering committee, something like that, where we actually put a whole bunch of work together. And we, did an array of things, create a website, things you would normally do. But we also worked on a big document to the Ministry of Forests, to the minister, on why this was a bad idea. And the essential argument was that the forests are worth more standing from their ecological value, their protecting species, protecting water, and also as a place, the intrinsic value is a place for people to appreciate nature. So we wrote this big document and it had lots of sections. And one of the really interesting sections had to do with our regional government and the relationship we have, because Metro Vancouver, the regional government, every regional government by law has to have a regional growth strategy, which is kind of like the regional OCP, how it's going to respond to growth and change. And in there's a section on protecting the environment and preventing climate change. And featured in there is Bowen Island. And there's a map that shows the areas of conservation and recreational lands and the importance. It talks about the importance of them. And all of the crown lands on Bowen are on that map, along with Crippen Park, of course. And there's also a map on connectivity, making sure it's a strategy to make sure that environmentally sensitive areas are properly connected. And there's a greenway shown as an arrow going right around Bowen Island. So Bowen Island was an interesting part of the regional strategy to provide conservation lands and recreation lands for its residents. So this became part of our analysis that we sent along. But then we thought, I was probably still working at Metro Vancouver then, or had recently been working then. And so I knew quite a lot about Metro Vancouver. I also knew about the regional parks strategy, and that the goal of parks is to protect ecologically sensitive areas and connect people to nature. I thought, okay, and they have an acquisition strategy because the parks were getting full within the region. They needed more. And one of the criteria for acquisition was ecologically valuable areas and areas that were threatened. That adds to their score and and whether this is a place where you acquire lands. So I happen to know the chair of the Metro Vancouver Board Parks Committee. It was Heather Deal. We worked together at Suzuki Foundation for many years. And it was to say, what about turning all of our crown lands into a park for the region? Because look how it's mentioned in your regional growth strategy. Thought, oh, that's a good idea. Why don't you come give a presentation to the Parks Committee? So 3 of us went and we presented to the Parks Committee. We produced some videos and we had, drone footage showing how great it was, and talked about how going up Mount Gardner is what a lot of people, we had data that shows a lot of people when they're coming to Bowen and visiting Crippen Park, they just go straight up Mount Gardner anyway. And the Parks Committee was interested. They, afterwards, after our presentation, we were out in the hall chatting about it, and the then mayor of Delta, who I knew from some work I'd done with her in the past, came out and said, that was terrific. Yeah, keep pushing on this, guys. It's could be really good. So, we thought, okay, protecting land, expanding parks on Bowen is metro parks on Bowen is a good way to protect the land and stop it from being fragmented, broken up into bits. And by logging or development, whatever that might be. Shortly after that, though, in terms of the logging threat, they were going to come and have a meeting. I think it was at the end of July in Collins Hall. The minister's staff was going to. And so what we did is we published this. We were going to organize a march of 1,000 people to walk with the minister's staff, from Snug Cove, from the ferry terminal to Collins Hall. And shortly after that, they canceled the meeting and stopped the plans. So, the urgency of the work that we were doing dropped off. Now, we know that they haven't got rid of those plans. In the last council, we met with the ministry staff whenever we could to discuss this, and they assured us that there were no plans right now. But